Once you start to get quite comfortable with the management and the implementation of Microsoft 365, you want to start automating tasks or performing certain tasks in bulk, or scripting some of the tasks to manage your objects or create your objects in Microsoft 365. In order to do that, most administrators will use PowerShell. PowerShell is a tool that allows you to script and automate many different tasks using the underlying infrastructure of what actually goes on to create, configure, manage objects in Microsoft 365. You see, Microsoft has created this UI, this user interface of administrative centers to make it easier for users to create objects, manage objects, configure them. But really in the background, the scripting that runs is defined a lot of the time by PowerShell, PowerShell scripts, PowerShell commands, and you can tap into that. You can utilize these PowerShell scripts and commands to be able to manage your resources. So in order to do that, we need to configure our local PowerShell installation to connect to Microsoft 365. And when I say where are local configurations of PowerShell, if your computer is a Mac, a Linux machine, or a Windows computer, you can use PowerShell on that computer. If you have Windows, PowerShell is already there for you, and we need to install an additional component to PowerShell. To define what we're connecting to and so what we're installing are PowerShell modules. So we need to download these PowerShell modules and install them. So there are different PowerShell modules for each workload, as well as PowerShell modules for Microsoft 365 and Azure AD. What I'm showing you here is an article that describes you the process of how to do that. But essentially the first part that you will always have to do is going to be to download the modules. So what I've already done on my computer is download those modules. All of the modules for Microsoft Online, Azure AD and Exchange Online as well have been downloaded. Now if I try to now from PowerShell run a command, if I do get an MSOL domain, which is Microsoft Online domain, that's the command that retrieves all of the domain name from my Microsoft 365 tenant. I'm signed into my machine as an administrator. If you see here, I've run my PowerShell session using the elevated privileges, basically running it as an administrator. But if I click Get MSOL domain, I'm going to get an error message. Actually, I mistyped that, run it again, I get an error message. And this is expected because even though I am connected on my machine using my administrator privileges, this PowerShell session does not have privileges to my Microsoft 365 tenant. Now let's try the same for Exchange. If I do a get EXO and EXO mailbox, which should retrieve all of my Exchange Online mailboxes, and I type enter, same thing. I'm not connected. Now I want you to notice something important here. It gives me two different error messages. One of them is telling me you're not connected to Microsoft Online Service, also known as Microsoft 365. And then the error message here is connect to Exchange Online. So even though Exchange Online is part of Microsoft 365, it has its own authentication system and its own connection requirement. So let's do that. Let's connect to our MSOL service. Connect to Microsoft 365. Now, as soon as I do that, I'm going to need to authenticate, so it's actually going to prompt me for authentication. So I can put in my username and password. And now I've successfully authenticated. Now by the way, I'm prompted for the password here, but I could have cached it inside of my session using a variable. So a trick to do that in the future, if you use the $sign and then put a variable here, I'm using cred for credential and I put equal. And I put a get credential command and I press enter. It's actually asking me to cache a specific credential inside of my PowerShell session. And then later on, instead of being prompted for the username and password, I could just refer to this $sign cred variable. So that's just a trick for you for your scripts in the future. So I'm going to clear my screen here so that I have a brand new screen. With the CLS command, and so I'm going to try again this getMSOL domain command that I tried earlier and see if it works this time. Pressing enter, and there we go. I now see all of the domain names that I have in my tenant. And remember, we added the Microsoft.com domain in an earlier video in this course, and of course it shows me that this is unverified. So I'm connected now to my Microsoft 365 tenant. I'm authenticated in this tenant using the PowerShell modules. I can actually perform any task that I want inside of this tenant. I can use set command, get command, or any of the PowerShell commands that are available. And there are a lot of commands listed on the Microsoft website. If you're not sure what command to use, you can actually use a functionality of PowerShell, which is called tab complete. So I'm going to use get, and then I want to see what's available. So I'm going to press the tab key, and I can toggle through each one of these. I can even go and refine that a little bit more and say just show me all of those that start with get app. And again, I'm pressing now the tab key to toggle through the various options. So that's a little PowerShell tip. Now let's try our exchange command. Again, so if I do get EXO mailbox, and once again, even though I'm connected to Microsoft 365, the connection to Exchange fails. And again, that's expected. So let's go ahead and do connect-exchange online. And so now with Connect Exchange Online, I'm going to press enter. And be authenticated again. Now remember, I could have used my $cred as well. And the connection to Exchange Online is happening. I have a prompt about the authentication mechanism, some advanced mechanisms that are becoming available now. And now let's try again our getEXO mailbox. And as you see, I've just retrieved all of the mailboxes in my organization. So I'm going to clear my screen again. So I'm now connected to Exchange Online, and if I want to do this for any other workload, I'll have to do the same thing. Install -module and then add another module like Microsoft Teams, for example. And if I do that, I'll be prompted to install that module, and then I'll be able to run all the PowerShell commands that relate to Microsoft Teams. So PowerShell is a great tool to script, automate the management, and have some advanced configurations for updating and configuring all of your objects in Microsoft 365. So I urge you to become comfortable with PowerShell and learn some of the functionalities that are available with this great scripting tool.